I'm Dana Searles, and welcome to This Week in Iowa Politics on We Are Iowa Plus. We are continuing to look ahead to the November elections now that we know who will be on the ballot. We'll sit down with another political expert who breaks down the national implications. Also, some key movements from the state government that could impact you, ranging from outdoor recreation to college courses. But first, we start with some top political headlines that came out throughout this week. We now know who will be on the ticket in November with Rob Sand, who is the Democratic nominee for governor. He announced his running mate for lieutenant governor. Crawford County Supervisor Dave Mulbauer will join Sand as they seek to become Iowa's next governor and lieutenant governor. He's originally from Manila. Mulbauer is a fifth-generation farmer and cattleman. He's currently serving his second term on the Crawford County Board of Supervisors, where he is the only Democrat on the board. Congressman Zach Nunn, who is running for re-election in a highly watched 3rd Congressional District, launched his first TV campaign ad. The 60-second ad shows Nunn in everyday life with his kids, then showing his work in combat and Congress. Now, Nunn's campaign said in part, quote, "Iowans aren't looking for another politician who can only talk about hard work. They're looking for a neighbor who lives and breathes hard work." Meanwhile, his Democratic challenger, Sarah Trone Garriott, also released her plans for one of those most competitive congressional districts in the country, saying in part, quote, "I'm running to lower costs, make health care affordable, and take on corruption in Washington. This November, Iowans will have a clear choice, a D.C. yes man who hides from them or a representative who stands with them." And while Iowa's 3rd Congressional District is one of the most competitive in the country, Iowa has some other races with national eyes on it. So I want to jump into a few reports showing where some of these key races stand. Starting with the governor's race, the Cook Political Report, which is nonpartisan, shifted that race from lean Republican to a toss-up. Of course, this came in just a few months ago, but still notable now that we know the two nominees. Businessman Zach Lane is the nominee for the Republicans, while State Auditor Rob Sand is running for the Democrats. Then Iowa has an open U.S. Senate seat after Republican Joni Ernst decided not to run for re-election. Democrats have poured a lot of time and money into this race, eyeing it as a key seat to flip. Now, the Cook Political Report has also moved the needle in this race from likely Republican to lean Republican. Current U.S. Representative Ashley Hinson is running for the Republicans, and current State Representative Josh Turek is running for the Democrats. And with all the attention on these races, a lot of Iowans may be wondering why and how Iowa has become such a political battleground state. I sat down with political expert and Iowa State University professor Karen Kedrowski to break down how Iowa's races can have an impact in Washington, D.C. Well, we have Karen Kedrowski with us from Iowa State. Thanks for being with us today.
My pleasure. It's great to be here, Dana.
So we're still kind of seeing the rollout of the primary elections, recapping some of this. Kind of want to start by just hearing from you some of your key takeaways from primary election night and the results that we saw.
Right. Well, it's very clear that the Democrats had a good night, nominating some very strong candidates for both the House of Representatives and the United States Senate. And on the Republican side, we had a big surprise, of course, with Zach Lane overtaking Randy Feenstra for the gubernatorial nomination on the Republican side. So, there's a lot riding on this. Democrats only need to flip a few Senate seats to take power in Washington on the Senate side, and also a few House seats. I think it's important for our viewers and listeners to know that the two main predictors of how a midterm election will go is the president's popularity and the state of the economy. And both of those are not doing too well. President Trump is underwater in terms of popularity. Some of his signature proposals have not gone over well in Iowa, and in fact have been kind of harmful to the Iowa economy in terms of tariffs, high gas prices, an unpopular war, things like that. So the economy, has inflation is increasing. So the Democrats are very optimistic. And because Iowa does not use partisan redistricting, 3 of its 4 congressional seats in the U.S. House of Representatives are essentially balanced districts, which means that they could easily flip from Republican to Democratic if there's a real Democratic momentum going into the November election.
Want to kind of go, race by race briefly just to kind of get your thoughts on the races. Want to start with the Senate race. The Cook Political Report actually changed that now to lean Republican versus likely Republican
Right.
after the primary election. Do you think, I guess, first, do you think this is a flippable seat? And second, how much effort do you think Democrats nationally will be focused on this seat when it comes to the stakes that it does have?
Yes, I think it is a flippable seat, but it's still going to be an uphill climb for the Democrats. So Rob Sand is sort of the right kind of Democrat to be running in Iowa. He's moderate. He's touting himself in terms of fiscal responsibility, which flows nicely from his position as auditor. He already has statewide name recognition, and he's in a good position to be able to raise the kind of funds that are necessary. He also has already started going on the attack against his Republican opponent. And that Republican opponent, of course, is vulnerable because he has spent so much time commuting back and forth from Kansas, where some members of his family live. And while I think Mr. Lane has done a good job of explaining the circumstances leading to that, right? That he has family obligations that he simply can't ignore, it's still an opportunity for Sam to try to paint him as something of a carpetbagger. Of course, any Democrat is going to be open to, accusations that they are liberal. You're going to be tied to popular Democratic leaders like Nancy Pelosi or Chuck Schumer. So he will have to be prepared for those kinds of attacks and work very hard to distinguish himself from what's really considered the progressive or extreme wing of the Democratic Party.
Apologize. You were talking about the governor's race. So apologize
Oh,
if
and
that
you
was
had asked
confusing.
about Senate, hadn't you?
No,
Oh,
you're good.
never
That
mind.
was
You can
perfect. No,
change that.
we talked about the governor's race. Yep. Nope. That's great. Because I was going to ask about the governor's race as well. So I'm glad you talked about that. But I guess I would also ask you the same question for the
Yeah.
Senate race. If you think it's flippable, and what do you see coming out
Yeah.
of this
Okay.
race in
So the
November?
Senate race is very close, and has, I think, been listed even as a toss-up. Ashley Hinson, like Marionette Miller Meeks and Zach Nunn, are going to have to defend their unpopular or their votes for unpopular Trump policies. The one big beautiful bill, which makes them vulnerable on health care, their support of tariffs, which makes them vulnerable in terms of agricultural prices, their support for immigration, which can, ICE's actions have been quite unpopular, even if people an immigration. Uh, Favor an immigration crackdown. Josh Turek is an extraordinarily strong candidate. And I would say that there are several reasons for that. One, he has already demonstrated that he can win in a Trump-leaning district on the western side of this state. Number two, he has a very compelling personal story, and he tells that story, often, and has in fact garnered the endorsement of a very popular former senator, Tom Harkin. But third, he does not really have the track record of a lot of controversial votes. So Ashley Hinson has been trying to paint him as saying that he thinks that, trans women should play in women's sports, that he wants, trans women or biological males in women's bathrooms. And those are all just extraordinary. Uh, they are really extraordinary exaggerations of what the case is, where he voted not to remove gender identity from Iowa Civil Rights Code. So that's a long way from bathrooms, as it were. Having said that, he's going to be in a good position. And I think given that Graham Plattner, who's the Democratic nominee in Maine, really is a controversial character and has uh, ever more emerging skeletons out of his closet, right? That might mean that national Democrats are going to be looking for another race to invest in the hopes of being able to flip some seats. And I think that could play very well to Josh Turek's benefit.
Coming on, my interview with political expert Karen Kedrowski continues. We dive into more of the congressional races and the impact your vote could have. Next up, political expert Karen Kedrowski and I talk more about the congressional district races and their national implications. We also talk about the impact your vote in November could have for future national decisions. Leads a little bit into my next question. Where does Iowa's open U.S. Senate seat rank in terms of importance for Democrats in this election?
Well, I think it's fairly high on the list. There are not many seats that are likely to be competitive, so I think this is one of maybe two or three, but they don't need very many, right? Now, what's also going to be one of the National Democrats' challenges is to retain the seats that they have against very strong Republican opponents. So I'm expecting that there'll be a lot of very competitive elections, a lot of very expensive elections in a number of states that really are swing states like Iowa. And if it had not been for the fact that, we have an open Senate seat and an open gubernatorial seat for the first time in more than a half a century, that meant that both races drew really strong candidates and a lot of interest from people who, want to move up in the political world, but also that President Trump's policies are particularly unpopular. So all of that means that, the Democrats were able to recruit great candidates to run, very strong candidates, and to run in what are really favorable open seat races and favorable circumstances.
Then you mentioned it earlier too, the national implications for our House district races. Obviously, we have three pretty competitive races all across the board. Which one do you think is maybe going to be the most important for Democrats looking to flip, or vice versa? Which one's the most important for Republicans looking to keep Republican?
Well, I think first of all, it's worth noting that the fourth district is safely Republican, and that's not because of partisan gerrymandering. Iowa does not do partisan gerrymandering, but the way that the districts are configured is just that the western part of the state, nearly half of the number of counties or so are very rural, and rural voters tend to favor the Republican Party. So the Republicans don't have to worry about anything there. The other three races, though, are really competitive. One that I think is going to be a very hot race again will be Christine Bohannon and Marionette Miller Meeks. Miller Meeks touts herself as a medical professional, as an MD, that she understands healthcare and the healthcare issues that face Iowans. However, she did vote to support the One Big Beautiful Bill, which has significant cuts to the Affordable Care Act subsidies and to Medicaid, and include work requirements in the future for Medicaid beneficiaries. So I think, sort of drawing that, you may be a doctor, but do you really, care about healthcare is going to be a key talking point for Professor Bohannon. I would also say that the open race in the second district is going to be an important one to watch. So open seat races are sort of, very unpredictable. They can be under certain circumstances. When you have a swing district, you have, a lot of national trends that seem to be favoring the out party. But also, again, open seats tend to draw very strong contenders and very strong candidates. And we see two members of the Iowa legislature, both of whom have legislative experience and deep ties to the community, running there. So I think that both parties, national parties, will be very interested in investing in that race as well.
And then the third congressional district, always pretty a hot district that a lot of eyes are always on. And obviously both candidates ran uncontested in the primary. But do you think this is a race that, we could still see a lot of national attention? Or do you think eyes might shift more towards Bohannon and Miller Meeks simply because, it's the third time and those votes have come down to single digits in the past?
Yeah, I think there will be more pressure on the first district because, again, it's a three-peat. And, so many of the issues that, Professor Bohannon found gained some traction for her. Talking about her, Miller Meeks living outside the district, attacking her on health care means that there's probably going to be, especially charged race and probably a very expensive race in that corner of the state. For the third district, though, um, Zach Nunn has significantly more name recognition. So he is an incumbent running for reelection. He has the advantages of incumbency. He stayed in the House race when he was toying with running for governor because the president asked him to. So I can imagine that Zach Nunn is going to want to cash in on that favor in some way with a Trump endorsement or perhaps bringing in big name members of the administration to campaign on his behalf. I think he'll have a fairly easy time raising money. Sarah Trone Garriott is a very strong candidate, and she has again a very compelling personal story to tell, especially given that she's a minister, right? So the Democrats in that case are not at all ceding, to the religious right, or phrasing themselves as being somehow atheistic or agnostic, right? She talks very openly about her faith, but she's going to have, she's a first-time candidate for Congress. She doesn't have the same level of name recognition, and it's just extraordinarily difficult to unseat an incumbent, especially when you've not challenged that incumbent before.
On this, want to get into my last question for you is just what do Iowans need to know about the importance of these November elections and how much of an impact their vote will have when it comes to what happens in Washington, D.C., and also at the state level with the governor's race?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, Iowa could really hold the keys to whether or not the Republicans stay in power, both in terms of the United States Senate and the United States House of Representatives. President Trump is governing in a time of unified government where Republicans control the House, the Senate, and the White House. But the majorities in both the House and the Senate are very, very small. And that makes it much more difficult for the president to get his agenda through Congress because it can be so easily stymied, right? And holding together the Republican coalition is as tricky as holding together the Democratic coalition, right? They're diverse groups. So it could really change Washington, and the second half of Trump's second term could be filled with investigations. He would have less ability to be able to get his legislative agenda through, and there would be much more, I think, vigorous oversight of the Trump administration. At the same time, flipping the governor's seat to Democratic could really change the nature of Iowa politics as well. Now, I don't think anybody expects the large majorities in the Iowa legislature to change significantly. They're likely to stay as Republican majorities. But again, the governor wields the veto. So the Republican leaders in the legislature will have to bargain with a potential Governor Sand to find legislation that they all find palatable and can agree with. And that means that definitely the policies will moderate, much more so than what we have seen, because Governor Reynolds has been in a very enviable position of having large Republican majorities in the state legislature for most of her terms in office.
Coming up, a new law is impacting how college students take certain classes, what the law requires, and how the Iowa Board of Regents is navigating it. The Iowa Board of Regents is working through how the University of Iowa's Center for Intellectual Freedom will handle a new state law impacting every student. Under this law, all students at Iowa public universities must take 2 courses in American history and government, and at the University of Iowa, those classes must go through the center. The center was created by lawmakers to promote conservative viewpoints in higher education, but it ultimately delayed the start of classes this year due to low enrollment.
Across the University of Iowa, there is not intellectual freedom. there is not intellectual diversity, and that this is one of the reasons why this center has had to be created.
Now, regions say they now have 2 years to expand the program and prepare before the requirement takes effect. Meanwhile, Iowa is taking a new step to grow outdoor recreation across the state. Governor Kim Reynolds signed an executive order this week at Lake Aquabi State Park near Indianola, creating a brand new office of outdoor recreation. State leaders say the office will coordinate tourism with local communities and industry partners to expand access to parks and boost economic impact.
Iowa state parks play a critical role in our state's history and our story. Each year, they draw millions of visitors from right here at home and all across the country by providing first-class outdoor recreation in Iowa's most beautiful outdoor spaces.
At the same time, Iowa has launched a new state park passport program, letting visitors check in at parks, earn points, and win prizes. For more information, you can visit traveliowa.com. Now, before we wrap up, we do have some sad news in Iowa politics. Longtime state lawmaker Julian Garrett has died at the age of 85. Senate Majority Leader Mike Klimisch confirmed the news. Now, Garrett was elected to the state house back in 2010. Then he was elected to the Senate in 2013, representing parts of Warren and Marion counties. He is the third state senator to die within the last year. In a statement, Senate Democratic leader Janice Weiner said in part, quote, "As our Senate family grieves the loss of yet another colleague, I take solace in knowing Julian's struggles are at an end. May his memory be a blessing to his wife Nancy and his family." Obviously, our thoughts are with him and his family. Well, another very busy week in Iowa politics, so let's look ahead to what we're tracking next week. We'll break down more of the top political headlines and continue to look at campaign efforts for the November election. We'll also look into the shakeup at the Polk County Board of Supervisors and why experts say this was expected. We'll have that and much more next week on This Week in Iowa Politics. Thank you all for watching on We Are Iowa Plus. I'm Dana Searles. Have a great day.